How's it going? Welcome back to the Road to Recovery podcast. I am Ryan, the least qualified individual here, and I'm here with my co-host, Tommy, certified nutritionist, PT, and probably a bunch of other things that I forgot. And I'm also sitting here with my personal dietitian and ED nutritionist, Jenna Limardo, who just realized changed her name. So thanks for coming here. I really appreciate you making the time on a Saturday, the day that we're all supposed to be able to get off of work and not have to do anything. So I'm really happy that you could be here. But I wanted to open this by talking about me and Tommy have, as you probably know, with me specifically, we have quite a history with eating disorders, and Tommy in specific, an even longer history than myself, and has gone through so much hell. And one thing I wanted to ask you, as somebody that has worked with a lot of people that deal with these types of situations, what are some of the very basic patterns that you see when an individual is coming in seeking help from a dietitian? And how do you gauge? One thing that we've talked a lot about in the podcast is, how do you gauge when you're ready to start getting that extra help to actually recover? Because it requires a certain personal willingness. And I think that a lot of people jump into recovery or wanting to recover before they're actually ready. And that was something I did, because I sought nutritionist help 5 years ago. And I remember just going and sitting there and not accepting anything that person said to me. Yet I would go anyways, because I was in this pseudo mindset of wanting to recover. So what are some of those like telltale signs of like that you look for to see if someone's actually ready to move forward with something like that?
Yeah. Do you want me to address this first?
Yeah.
Well, kind of back to your first question on what patterns are typically seen, with patients that are coming in. Each role that a different dietitian or nutritionist plays in the road to recovery is going to look a lot different depending on what facility you're at. Does the person coming in, are they already seeing a therapist? Do they have a primary care provider that is monitoring things or is even aware of what's going on? So, person to person, it can be very variable with what patterns we're going to be seeing. I see just a few, but I see some adolescents as well. And the pattern that I see there typically is the parents start to notice behaviors that are concerning to them, whether that's in how the child is talking around food. What are maybe they're stopping attending family dinners, or starting to have a really hard time eating out with the family. Or maybe they're an athlete, right? And they're starting to get injuries. And so with, a population that lives away from home and is maybe in their 20s, their 30s, that age group, that's a really unique age group as well, because the relationship to family is so different person to person. And we have, a lot of, say, mid-20s that are living at home, whether that's to save money or moving back, say, from college, or, kind of in that transition phase. And so patterns that I'll typically see will vary person to person. But a lot of times when someone's coming in, they're saying, especially, I'm in the outpatient setting, right? So this is when people do have to choose to show up, or seek it out, essentially, unless they got a referral from a therapist or a primary care provider. But typically what I'm seeing is them coming in and saying, hey, either I, my mom and dad, even, people in their 20s, my mom and dad are really worried. And it usually starts with, man, I don't know why people are worried about me. People are saying things and I don't really understand. Like, and there's kind of a lot of phase, the first phase in appointments with me are typically like, well, I'm here to see you, Jenna, but I don't really know why.
Right.
And so a lot of times in that, I think deep down there is like a knowing, right? There is a sense of urgency, or a sense of, man, something's not right, but I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. And so in that case, when people are coming in kind of, man, people are noticing things, but I don't know really why I'm here, but I know I need help. Sometimes it's someone coming in with their husband or their partner, or, you know, someone coming in and saying, hey, like he wants me here or she wants me here, but I don't really know. Like, I don't see an issue with my behaviors. So I
So
think that's probably one of the biggest things
right.
initially that I see when people are coming in.
So when you have that situation though, where it's like someone else, like the parent is bringing the kid in, or the spouse is bringing their significant other in, when you see situations like that, and the one person really doesn't know why they're there, how do you navigate that playing field? Because it's they're not necessarily in that point of self-realization where they even know what's going on, because that's exactly like Tommy, you know what's up.
Absolutely, I can relate to that, because actually, when I actually had started having eating disorder behaviours back when I lost my mum in 1997, I was a professional footballer at the time, and I just believed I was getting fitter, really, because I was cutting down on my food. I was thinking that I was getting this body. I felt as if I was getting fitter. People around me were obviously telling me they believed I had an eating disorder, and it didn't come till later on down the line where I actually realised I had an eating disorder. Then I began to hide it from people, obviously because of the stigma that surrounds it with males obviously having eating disorders. So kind of relate to that a lot.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, when someone comes in like that and they don't know why they're there, what is your like approach to that? Like your first step with that someone that really doesn't know? How do you help them get to that, I don't know, realization, or how do you help them get to that point, I guess, as far as you've seen in a clinical setting?
Yeah, I really try to approach every patient, whether they're realizing of what's going on or not. I start with, hey, people are worried about you, but I want to talk about what you're experiencing today. And so I really dive in first to tell me about what life is like for you right now, and tell me about, you know, tell me about what tell me about food. And sometimes people are in a space where that brings so much anxiety to talk about,
Right.
that, you know, if I notice that, you know, barriers go up right away, or people start to lose eye contact, right? Or start to not want to go there, I say, okay, tell me about, what do you do for fun? What has your life been like the last few years? And we really just start to explore, you know, sometimes it doesn't always look nutritional or nutrition focused in the appointment. We really start to explore, what has your last couple of years been like? What has changed with your mind and your body? Or what are things that you're thinking about, you know? And then as we work through that together, I try to be really clear with where I'm headed at the beginning, instead of dropping it on them, you know, 2 or 3 appointments later, or you know, or at the end of the appointment being like, okay, well, yeah, you are struggling with an eating disorder. Those are not the words out of my mouth. More
Right.
so it's right at the beginning saying, hey, from what I know about, or after we get to know each other, hey, from what I know about you, I'm concerned because XYZ. I'm concerned about this physically, but also mentally, because I think there's this stigma, right, still out there, and kind of what Tommy mentioned, that an eating disorder has a certain look. And to have an eating disorder, you have to be XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
And that is simply not true. Now, do physical indicators sometimes really show us what's going on and are of major concern with people? Of course. But any size body, any gender, any background can suffer from an eating disorder.
Yeah.
It's not a one size fits all, or, you know, anything like that. And so, because that's one of the biggest patterns too, is people come in and they say, I'm not sick enough to be seeing you. So even if I'm not that person, or I don't, like, my weight is fine, or my lab values, I went to the doctor and my lab values are fine. So all of these really objective measures that are looked at, people will say, well, mine are fine. And the issue with that is that, you know, anyone is sick enough to seek treatment. That's my biggest message is like, whatever your weight is, like, you belong here. You deserve to work through these feelings and thoughts, even if you don't feel like you have full blown, whatever, you know, XYZ eating disorder. And that's honestly, along with pattern, back to that, you know, question, even that's where typically we'll even begin as well, is what's making you believe that you have to be at a certain, like, let's unpeel the layers of why you have to be this, or this to be sick enough to seek treatment.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of a big important, a really important factor there is this other state, which is a topic of a podcast that we're going to do in the future, talking about pseudo recovery, which is a state that, like, I'm in currently, where I had reached like a level of weight that was not dangerous to my health per se, but I still had all of these behaviors going on in the background that have led me to where I am physically now, dealing with like some neuropathy stuff. And so, and even mentally, just like being in, if you're in a mental state of always needing that level of control, there's something going on, more than, it's so much more than just a physical disease. And I think that's what we've talked about several times on the podcast so far, is probably the mental aspects, like 90% of it, really. And so when you meet somebody that is in this pseudo recovery phase, and they're like, "Oh, I'm totally fine," all of these things, I think that's a really good approach, is to look at their day-to-day life and stuff like that. So, Tommy, do you have any follow-ups with that?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of protocol that we use. I'm actually a eating disorder support worker for BEAT in the UK, so I do like online work, but that's a lot harder because it's not got that face-to-face interaction. But we try to do the kind of same thing. We try to ask them open-ended questions to try and let them open up. But what I would say is that there is a flip to the coin on that, because when we're talking about obviously not looking on the body image type of thing, it seems to be, I don't know where about the rest of the world, but especially in the UK, a lot of people are coming forward and saying that they're not being taken seriously by their general practitioners because they're deemed as not been at this skeletal weight, or deemed anorexic, and they're not worthy of treatment. So they're actually going away and they're actually making themselves more ill, and it's actually hindering the recovery and making it just like a never-ending cycle of hospital admissions and then being released back out into the community. And I just don't think it's helping people.
And that's actually kind of an interesting point, because what I've noticed with my ins and outs, just going to doctors and stuff like that, is like, even though they know I have a history of anorexia and an eating disorder, I haven't really been treated as a patient with that history up until I went to my one gastro doctor, and he was the only one that ever acknowledged that if you have a patient who has a history of eating disorders, you have to treat them almost as a completely different type of patient than just a normal person who's sick coming in, because like, they take everything different and their needs are different than somebody that is just coming in. And so I think that there's this like level of disconnect that's still within the general medical community with those things. And that's why it kind of leads to all these other problems. It's this lack of communication, I suppose, between the different sects of the medical. I don't know if you've seen this, Jenna, at all, or not.
Yeah, this is actually something that we deal with a lot. And I think something I've been learning too is it's not necessarily because it's easy to go, well, why don't they realize this? Like, why are still weights being taken that aren't blind? And, you know, like all these things, like why are all these different things. And what I'm beginning to realize is it's, you know, the medical community is if they're under a strong pressure from insurance companies and to see a certain number of patients per day, and their intent, can you guys hear me okay still? My heater just kicked on. Their intent is good. You know, the intent is they want to care for people, and that's typically, you know, why they entered the profession. But under the pressures that they face and the lack of education that they receive through schooling and, you know, through even within the medical community, is very little. if none, related
Yeah.
to eating disorders and nutrition.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have some really wonderful, we have a couple practitioners, you know, here in Salt Lake City that have been working on this for the last, you know, 20, 30 years. They've dedicated their career to really trying to increase education among the medical community, but it's one doctor at a time. It's one nurse at a time, right? It's one facility at a time. And it's, how do we approach conversations with these doctors, or how do I advocate for my patients and say, hey, I want to know why you're doing this and let's have a conversation about it, versus, hey, you're doing everything wrong. Because there is a huge disconnect, and there's no one's really having, I mean, there's conversations being had, and there's huge, you know, milestones that are happening related to it. But in general, like day-to-day people aren't having the conversations, I think, about like how, like, why does this look different? Like, why do you need to look at these other labs? Or why do you need to like speak a little bit differently, or treat them like a normal person, but like have in your mind like key phrases not to say. Like, don't sit in there and hand out the nutrition advice or hand them a diet meal plan, you know, related to XYZ. So,
and I think one of the biggest things that just needs to be worked on in general with all of those stuff is that is a lot of the I guess when they realize that they have that patient, it's like how they phrase things to that patient. Because when I go in, if I was still in that really deep anorexic mindset, I could go out feeling like I'm totally fine, I suppose, or not to seek other help. And that's and you're right, they don't generally have a background in nutrition and stuff like that. And also, I think some of the, especially for the way that like the standard American diet is, they don't do all the labs that I think are necessary to determine whether someone is actually adequately fed nutritionally, as far as like some of the blood work stuff, because they don't check certain vitamins and stuff like that where you could be easily deficient, I suppose. But that's kind of beside the point. I can't change the system in a day. And then there's also like this side of the patient going in, and so it's like this back and forth that you have to play, this tiptoed kind of dance, because it goes both ways. Like nobody's ever fully in the wrong. It's always like a tug of war kind of situation, if you think. But I think one thing that is really important in recovery is being able to challenge yourself. And this is something that we actually talked about on the last podcast with Ethan, who's an eating disorder recovery coach himself. And I wanted to ask you a specific question as a dietitian, and just like your own personal thoughts on it. He went through this recovery, and then we started talking about pseudo recovery. And in order to be fully recovered, he talked about trying this thing called eating with wild abandonment, which is basically binge eating. But it's not binge eating in like the clinical sense of what is like medically defined, but it's like eating to your fullness. Is that what it was, Tommy? Something like that? Is that what it was? Explain it maybe a little.
He basically follows Tabitha Farrar, if you know her. She's obviously on YouTube. She basically talks about eating to abundance. Basically, she just basically talks about like eating that if you need to eat 10,000 calories a day. That's kind of the protocol that he followed. But he said that it kind of turned into like binge eating for him. No, it doesn't for everybody, but I think everybody's different anyway. So maybe it just affected him in that manner. I don't know.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jenna what she thought about what you thought about I guess that idea of eating with wild abandonment, kind of just like, because I've had some talks with Ethan, and I was wondering if that's something that you would even recommend, or maybe that's like too far to the one side. Like it's like, because my whole thing is like, is that jumping from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and then you get caught there. I don't think it necessarily is. I think everyone's a little different, but as far as, I don't know, do you kind of get what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I completely hear where you're headed. So something that I that I would tread lightly or approach cautiously here is typically when, say, someone's struggling with anorexia or binge eating disorder or bulimia or, a not specified eating disorder, just restricting and binging and things like that.
Yeah.
So typically what can be going on is some kind of extreme, right? The brain is already playing extremes. There is the eating disorder voice. They're battling their inner voice that's saying, hey, you need to eat, but they're constantly feeling guilty about that. There's other things going on, whether that's anxiety, depression, personality disorder, OCD, bipolar. So sometimes the eating disorder serves a purpose. Like this is going to sound silly, right? But sometimes the eating disorder is serving a purpose for a person that's actually helping ground them, potentially, bring them back to reality for maybe a mental illness that is really taking them away or really, pulling at them. And so I guess I say this because I'm not saying, eating with wild abandonment is necessarily wrong, but what I hear in my mind when I hear that is also a framework that I typically use, maybe just slightly differently. So, the concept of intuitive eating has a lot of controversy out there, but at its core, it's really getting to honoring hunger and fullness and respecting the body's needs day to day, being flexible. Now, it's on a continuum. So no one ever arrives at being a perfect intuitive eater. We're all born with an innate ability, but there's different tools and resources to help us honor our bodies throughout the lifespan, ideally. So where I approach like kind of living in that freedom or eating to that fullness is saying, hey, our goal here is for you to be able to respect your needs and improve that food with relationship in your body. Now, we're going to try to initiate some structure, whether that be through a meal plan or, a flexible meal plan, whatever that looks like for you and needing it this specific day and time, because there are changes going on in your brain that are making it really hard to make decisions in the moment if you need to eat or not.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on for this person that is beyond just being able to say, oh, okay, I'm just going to respond to what I crave right now, or I'm just going to respond to my hunger or my fullness level.
Because one thing I want to say is like for me, like right now in this state, I crave things all the time. Help me, Jenna. Help me. No,
Yeah.
but it's interesting because like for me, well, I always come at it from it's like a double-edged sword for me because it's like I'm trying to eat for nutritional health from a micronutrient standpoint, so vitamins, and then at the same time I'm trying to also not let that thought get into my anorexic side of my brain and be like, you got to control all these little other things now. And I even gotten to the point now where I actually don't look at the total number of calories quite as much. And as I focus more on making sure I get vitamins and stuff like that, because that's what my body needs to function. I look at calories more as like, okay, I need to like gain weight for my own physical health. But I'm getting to the place, but at the same time, it's like that's still a controlling mechanism. So it's like it's hard to ever be truly free of it. And so I think that's the theory behind like the wild abandonment thing is to like truly like let go. But I can see how that easily becomes like letting go too much. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think to what you just said, right? Because the letting go for someone could lead to falling back, say, into anorexic behaviors or restriction, and it is everyone's going to respond to that different. But if we think of it from an approach of like not a meal plan that's handing you calories and exact counts, but okay, on your journey in this process of pursuing freedom, how do we establish together some ideas throughout the day that are kind of non-negotiables for you right now,
right,
to help, I guess, encourage appetite based patterns, even if there's lack of because appetite is so wild and our brain is designed to regulate it, but things get in the way of that. emotions, depending on our history with restriction or how we've honored our needs. And so returning back to appetite-based patterns and your body being able to trust again, there's not an arrival date. It's more so okay, at this point in recovery, like, you know, I'm working towards food freedom. And by doing that, like, I'm actually focusing on this plan so that I can be more free to allow my brain space to think about other things that I care about.
Yeah, and
So,
that's super important, because I think and this is me, like for years, like I've always been interested in nutrition, and like just from a scientific standpoint, like it fascinates me, and I've always been into fitness. But there's a level of where that took me to a very dangerous place, because that's all I cared about. And this is something I talked about, like a video I made of myself, like, you know, you're a hypochondriac when blah blah blah, and I was somebody that all my thoughts revolved around my health, and that's something I still kind of struggle with sometimes. But I think that's where things that I've implemented, like healthy distraction, like forcing myself to do something that is totally not in that realm, like making a video or something like that, that's totally beside the point. I think those are things that can help somebody that deals with those cycles, because what you're doing in your brain is you have these neural connections, and your body is all about patterns, right? So you'll have these patterns built up over time. And so the idea with the wild abandonment type style idea is to completely break those neural connections and create new synapses in your brain to form a new pattern of not doing what you've done. So I think that's kind of where that comes in. I think you have to go out. I think wild abandonment is this is my personal opinion, is a good idea if you have some professional guidance. If that's something, I don't know, what do you think, Tommy? Like, hit me.
Yeah, kind of the theory behind it is it's based on the migration effect. They talk about this quite a lot. It's basically where your body is, back in our caveman days, take it to that kind of thing. We'd obviously go and look for food. When our bodies are restricted so much with all the calorie restriction, we basically begin to over-exercise and things like that. So we're basically trying to migrate for food. So Tabitha Farrar uses this protocol where it's called rehabilitate, rewire, recover. So basically you've got a nutritional rehabilitate, then obviously neurally rewire those pathways, and then that leads you on to dealing with the recovery side of things. So that's kind of a method that she goes by.
And the theory is, like, after you do that for a while, your mind will naturally, like, bring you back down or something like that, right?
That's exactly it, yeah.
Yeah, I find it interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I would even be happy to explore that more, because I think that the intention behind it, I am completely on board with that. And I think that what you mentioned earlier is very important, for your listeners or for other people to hear, is the fact that, professional guidance, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's a dietitian and a therapist and, a good primary care provider on your team or whatnot, is important to help with that accountability piece and help you. Like, sometimes we have blinders on, right? Like it's so easy to get those blinders on and to not see that our behavior is actually driving. Yeah, we all do, and that it's driving another behavior, or that we're sinking back into old habits that were once really dangerous to us. So, seeking like forms of treatment, and there's so many different, treatment modalities and therapies out there that there's not one right approach, but it's finding that fit, and it's saying, okay, how is this really helping me live a more engaging, enriched life? How is this contributing towards freedom and my values too?
Right.
Yeah. So that's good.
I was going to ask if you have somebody like a patient that comes to see you, and they're obviously, what's your kind of protocol for like your dietary implements and things like that? Do you work with people that's obviously vegan, or do you have like a kind of set plan? Because I see a lot of people, me and Ryan's talked about it a lot. People obviously going keto, vegan, and it's basically just swapping one eating disorder behavior for another. Not with everybody, obviously, because everybody's different, but it is quite vastly, we're seeing that a lot.
Yeah. So you're kind of, just so that I clarify, kind of saying, like, if a patient's coming and they are struggling with an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And they're saying, okay, I really, I want to pursue keto or paleo, or
Yeah.
I want to be vegan.
Yeah.
Yeah, like thinking like protocol for that is my mind first goes to, how do I explore why they want to do this, and like where is their intention and their motivation coming from,
Right.
and what are the risks, like the risk factors that could essentially contribute more to the eating disorder. So like I can think of a patient right now that she's very strong, like she's ethically being vegan is very important to her. Like it's more about that than nutritional things. And I've been seeing her for at least a year, and something with her that we talk a lot about is how is being vegan also kind of feeding the restrictive side of your brain, right? Like your choices become so much more limited. And with someone that's already, say, really struggling with restriction, I say, I'm not trying to tell you not to be vegan, but how can is there any way within your veganism that we can initiate some flexibility?
Yeah.
Because say someone that's struggling with restriction and binge eating, but they're a vegan, but say their binges consist of, and I want to make sure I don't say anything that's triggering for anyone, but consist of a food that's not vegan. It's right there. That behavior in itself is then shame inducing, because not only is the behavior leading to like feelings of shame, which it just perpetuates the cycle, but also not only the behavior, but what was eaten. Right. So, I mean, back to your initial question, though, I can go on tangents sometimes, but with like these diets that are coming in general, really, because I see a handful of patients that also don't struggle with eating disorders, or that are coming in for various reasons, or because they're saying, hey, I really want to do this and I want to do it with keto. I challenge, and I try to challenge gently, and the reason being is because if we get rid of a food group, if we like a major food group, or if if we get rid of a major source of nutrients we were getting before, like we can't take out something without thinking that it'll just, that our bodies will just get it from something else naturally. And so, yeah, I don't prescribe one specific diet. I'm not like a dietitian that's like, oh, you have to go plant-based or you have to do this. I'm more so like, how do we focus on the behavior? And like with meal plans that I do give out, like I try to gauge it towards the person, but my protocols, we develop this together. Like this is going to be something we do in session, and the reason I do that is just because it's outpatient. I'm only seeing them so often, and I want that work to be developed together, because I try to tell them this is about you. This isn't about you just learning from another expert,
right?
Where everyone's out to tell you the best thing. Like I'm here to help find the best thing for you. I'm not here to hand you another.
And this is something I found in my own like discovery of, because I just got done reading like a book called Whale's Protocol by a doctor who has an autoimmune disease, and she's figured out how diet has been able to help her take some of that control. That I don't particularly know if I have an autoimmune disease or not, but what I like her general approach to it. But at the same time, I know I can't go full hog on it, because it'll lead me into those behaviors again. And the way the diet is set up is generally set up for someone who is already somewhat overweight and they need to lose weight. And that's like how I feel like, because of our society, the way our society is, a lot of the way diet is talked about, and I hate the word diet too, the way diet is talked about is that
eating pattern.
But the way eating patterns are discussed is because we live in a society that's generally more on the obese spectrum, or needing to lose a couple pounds or something like that, then that's how diets are pushed. And the other side isn't talked about necessarily at all. Like I don't see it in the
Right.
mainstream. And so while there are things that I like about it as far as nutritional value that I can take away, I kind of have to keep myself from trying to go fully into just one thing and allow myself to, like I told you, like I had a success recently where we were out of town. I had already had dinner and I was still hungry. So I freaking went to the buffet and I slammed it because I was still hungry. And it's like I didn't care. And you got to get there's some of that personal challenge you got to give yourself.
Mhm.
And so something I personally do every week is like today, my family and I were going to go out, see a movie. We're going to go out to dinner. I don't really care where we go. I'm just going to get and eat something there. And I think that you got to do those little things if you're ever going to actually move forward with anything else, because I look at it, like I said, from a different angle because I have other health conditions stuff going on, and I know certain things trigger my neuropathy. So I got to look at it from that angle too. But that doesn't mean I have to go. I see it all the time in these groups where everyone is really developing some sort of eating disorder, even though they're not underweight. But because they have something that they think they need to be doing, it creates this synapse in their brain that gives them a pattern that may not even be benefiting them at all. It's just all a placebo in their brain. So it's really fascinating. Yeah, I think eating disorders are much more common. I don't even need to think it. They're definitely more common than are talked about because they come. There's no size to them. The weight thing is totally subjective. It's the dangerous side of it. But I think the way that diets are perpetuated and the way the fitness industry perpetuates what you should look like and what you should eat and what you should do to get to these things helps put a lot of people that are even just trying to pursue health like you and I were, or mentally think about that, you get in these loops and then you just screw yourself. So I don't know. That's my rant for the day.
That's what I was going to say as well. That's kind of the problem as well when you're talking about the fitness industry. Quite a lot of the guys go under the radar because they don't look at the guys that's get things like bigorexia in the gym, and there is much of an eating disorder, but they look, for all intensive purposes, they look buff and they look healthy. So people don't think any differently because society deems them as being normal. It's hard. It really, really is.
Have you ever come across, Jenna, in your like outpatient, any like work with like people that, I guess you kind of talked about it, where you've met people that like look generally pretty healthy, but they're still dealing with like these type of mentalities and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. This is so much more common than what does get talked about. Exactly what you said. Anybody and anybody can suffer from an eating disorder. And something I always like to clarify with people too is there's a spectrum, right? So there's, within the DSM-5 criteria, there's different, things to specify an actual eating disorder, but there's a spectrum. So there's disordered behaviors, there's distorted body image that leads to disordered eating behaviors. There's so many places on a spectrum that someone could be that, I think a lot of times I see people that come in that are saying, a lot of my referrals are people that are coming and saying, I want to lose weight. And one of my first things that, we talk about is why, what's your history with diets? What have you been told? What's influenced your definition of health? And as we sort through those things and the pressures that they talk about and the tears that, explode about what they're trying to do or the behaviors they've started to partake in to really get to a certain size so that at their next checkup, they're, at a lower BMI or whatnot, is honestly heartbreaking because so many people are dealing with this on some level or another. I have seen people that are doing bodybuilding competitions, and are very a part of the, the fit industry, and that come in and are saying, hey, like, I really need you to help me balance my macros, and their intention is so amazing because I've had a couple guys that come in and they say, I'm working with my nutritionist that's a part of my gym that I work out at for my bodybuilding, but I really wanted to come to you as well, just to get a couple different opinions. And to kind of see like if this is going to support my health, like how is this going to influence me? And I say, okay, well, first we need to talk about your goals. You know, are we talking about how is this going to influence you being up on the stage? Or how is this, like, what role is this going to play when you're not in your bodybuilding competition? And are you going to still be following these things? Because, you know, what you just said, a small diet or something that we do for a short amount of time, depending on who we are and what traits we possess, can trigger us into a lifelong type of behavior that becomes really harmful. So yeah, I can still remember this guy like just so clearly, and us sitting there at, you know, in the office, and me really challenging him and asking him, like, the more he revealed, he's like, this is like on my bucket list. Like, I want to participate in one competition. And he's like, and I'm trying to do everything I can to get there, but I have a daughter and a wife. And he's like, this is just becoming so hard. And and right there, it was like, okay, talk to me how in this process we can honor your needs, and how if this process starts taking away from your needs and your mental health and how you're showing up for your family, which sounds really important to you, you know, talk to me about your willingness to table that or set that aside. And not that I'm trying to be a dream crusher or say, you know, don't participate in that, don't do that. But yeah, I have a lot of people that come in that are part of the, you know, fitness industry and saying, I want to be, or long distance runners, right? Or like, I just want to be faster. I want to do this. And it's like, okay, does lighter technique, does it really mean faster? Does it mean less injury? No. You know, and so yeah, so it's, Ryan, it's so common.
Yeah, no, I know. I had a talk yesterday just with my personal trainer and Tommy's personal trainer. We had the same guy. We were talking about this very thing about the whole bodybuilding, and I was caught up in it. Like, the whole reason I even got into my first anorexic state of weight loss was because I was reading all the bodybuilding like forums on weight and all these things. And obviously, when I was probably like, when I started cutting weight like 125 pounds anyways, I probably didn't need to cut anyways. But then you get in that mindset and you have this image of what you want to look like. And then the more and more you do it, you realize you're not looking like it. So you do it, and you do it more and more. And then you realize that, oh shoot, now I'm like not at all what I wanted to look like. And I feel like crap. So I guess the last question I wanted to ask you before we ended this, particularly, was about going back to the one spectrum of people that do have anorexia and that are underweight. What do you view if they are someone that's like me and Tommy? We value exercise. We like always have been active individuals, or always loved that kind of thing. How how do you go about talking about exercise with someone like myself, like we've talked about? How do you talk about that with them? Like, would you recommend that they stop? Would you recommend just that? Yeah. I just wanted to see your view.
This is a really big deal.
Yeah.
If the person that I'm seeing is on a team with also a therapist and whatnot, I'll first make sure that they're getting the same information from, say, their doctor and their therapist, so that they're not being, you know, fed multiple different things or being told different things. It starts with the exploring of what exercise has been for them, and when it's been excessive in the past, or it's been used to compensate for food intake or calories, and depending on where they're at also with the weight. It has been with certain patients that are essentially needing a higher level of care but aren't able to pursue that at that time. Exercise is often like, it's off limits.
Yeah.
So, you know, if I'm seeing a person that's like, hey, I really want to get you to a higher level of care, but, you know, they're not pursuing that. It's okay, while you're an outpatient, I need to see you, you know, weekly. Your therapist needs to see you weekly, and exercise is off limits. Now, if someone's kind of in the phase of they've restored to a weight where their body is, you know, functioning adequately, and they're not suffering from injuries at the time, and things like that, typically we'll talk about boundaries. So we'll say, what is it that we're going to need to have in place for you to keep this a safe place? And so whether that's, okay, a a 30-minute walk, or, this is how many days a week is appropriate. Some people really function off of it kind of feeds the eating disorder sometimes, but knowing, okay, on days like when they're challenging themselves with how much to eat, it's okay. If you do your meals, that's okay. You're able to pursue a walk, but if your meals aren't being pursued and you are in a restrictive state, exercise is off limits. So it is very person to person, but
and this is something that I personally struggled with when I was starting to get back into it. My therapist, who dealt with with eating disorder recovery, strictly told me no exercise, and I didn't exercise for a good year until I was up over 100 something pounds. And now I'm at this weird crossroads of how much should I exercise and all that stuff. And that's why I'm working with Jason, who's working with Tommy over here, because he's worked with these individuals. So I'm on a very limited, strict, what I can do.
I was going to say, it's a lot of push and pull typically. So I'll get people that go, well, but it's for my mental health. I will go crazy if I don't move my body. And there is, there's a piece to that, but we have to be careful. We have to be really careful.
I look at that as the eating disorder voice.
Yeah. Honestly. And so that's what we'll say, this is the voice that's coming. And I do believe there's a way for movement that exists, and I think that movement can be a really big piece of recovery, especially for people that it's say it is an athlete, say it is someone that has been a part of sport their whole life, or has, done XYZ. But so I believe it has a place, but kind of what you just spoke to, how you're working with someone that knows how to approach it gently and with boundaries. No matter how you spin it, accountability is going to be needed, because the eating disorder voice can play such a strong role in, pushing that person back into obsessive exercise or movement.
Yeah.
And sometimes it looks like finding other movement that isn't associated with what they used in the past for
yoga and things like that.
Yeah. So okay, how can we get you to move in a way that's completely different and create new associations with movement that you were doing it before to burn calories? How can we do it now to find movement that you actually like, that you enjoy? Do you like yoga? Do you like to dance? Do you, what is it that you like to do? So kind of reframing the exercise too, and finding new ways to move and new intentions, or challenging their intentions behind it.
Sounds like we're going to have a talk on Monday.
Yeah.
That was exactly the same. I actually got a GP referral from my doctor. He actually referred me for exercise, but way back years ago, or I would have quit exercise altogether. But it was basically because I had such severe osteoporosis, and they reckoned that I was going to be wheelchair bound, because I actually suffered sciatic nerve damage below my left knee. And it was basically for that. And I had a special personal trainer who was obviously designated for eating disorders, and he worked with me kind of really closely to make sure I was doing things. So it's got its place, like you say, but everybody's different.
Right. Because we have, what you just mentioned, right? Arthritis and heart conditions. There's so many pieces to the puzzle that can become so dangerous. And so depending on the state in recovery in which someone is huge.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, I really appreciate Jenna, you coming on and talking about this. I think this has really been pretty eye-opening. Is there any, where can we find you on social media that we can link you up?
Yeah. So my social media, I'm on Instagram, and that's intuitivefuel_RD. So just the word intuitive fuel _RD. What was that?
Everybody go and follow there.
If you follow, I am, I'm not new to Instagram, but I'm really starting to try to develop more messages and put more content out, and working on developing a website. So yeah, and just an outpatient in Salt Lake City right now, but would love to connect with you guys more too. And I appreciate
I just followed you.
Perfect. I do appreciate you guys having me.
Welcome.
Do you want to close us out, Tommy? Because I opened
You
it.
go, Ryan. I'll let you go this time for a change.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. If you liked it, make sure you subscribe to the channel and check us out on our other socials, of which I actually need to start working on. But I hope you check us out, Tommy, Jenna. Thank you again, and we'll see you. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, you guys.